professionally. So joining me on the podcast, or excuse me, on the LinkedIn Live, sorry, Force of Habit, Evgeny. Your podcast expertise is rubbing off on me. This is a LinkedIn Live specifically focused towards folks in the information security space, but really this is kind of generic to folks in tech. This is an event that is put on by the Canadian Cybersecurity Network, CCN. For those who are not yet members, there is a LinkedIn group. It's one of the largest in Canada, and would encourage everybody to go in and subscribe. It's got tremendous resources, regardless of what stage of your career you're in. So for those who are first starting out, for those who are mid-career, or for those who are more on the expert side, the Canadian Cybersecurity Network is just a tremendous resource. There's a lot of really great content, training, as well as events, both in person and in virtual. So very much recommend folks check it out. Joining me on the I keep wanting to say podcast. Joining me on the live stream, we've got Evgeny, we've got Sean, we've got Lee. Why don't we go around the room and we'll let folks introduce themselves. And so I've got Evgeny, was quick on the draw. He was first into the webinar link here. So Evgeny, over to you. Who are you?
I'm Evgeny. I've been around for a number of years, more than 20 years in cybersecurity. Started my career in the Navy in Israel. Later on, worked at Checkpoint in QA, moved to Canada. Some interesting gentlemen that will speak after me made the mistake of hiring me to Herjavec Group. I spent there 16 years doing a variety of work, from installing firewalls to later on managing several groups in professional services, to later on managing the architecture services and supporting enterprise in Canada, US, and Europe as well. I did my graduation last year. I'm now working for myself. I'm supporting and consulting to MSSPs, VARs, and also vendors. I also have a podcast with a friend Dimitri and my own as well. And I'm being very active in the Canadian cybersecurity group and helping everyone where I can.
Looking forward to hearing some of your stories. I feel like you've got you can probably draw on quite a few different career stops along the way with some of the stories. Sean, I'm going to turn it over to you. Welcome to, first of all, the West Coast, as we were talking about just recently, West Coast, Best Coast, so transplant from Ontario. But Sean, for those who don't know, who are you?
I'm Sean Higgins. I'm the former Chief Technology Officer and was one of the co-founders for Herjavec Group, where Robert and George were out there selling all kinds of different technologies, and I was the one that just kind of had to go make it work. Part of it was picking up brand new technologies, and they said, "Hey, we just sold this brand new technology. Why don't you go learn it and go install it and then go teach people how to use it?" So I've spent a lot of time learning, playing with technologies, brought Evgeny on to Herjavec Group early on. I also migrated into doing incident response, where I, remediated a major incident for a large casino in Las Vegas. And then towards the end of my time at Herjavec Group, I was working with clients, helping them first off, me understanding where they are in their cybersecurity journey, and then later helping them figure out what their next steps were. Because everybody's journey in security is different, and it's a journey. It's never get there and you're done. And, when I left Herjavec Group last year, that's what I decided to do. Is I'm going to, work with a few clients, help them understand their journey and help them move that ball forward a little bit at a time.
Well, likewise, I'm looking forward to hearing your experiences. Hopefully the fail wasn't related to casino security, although I don't know. I guess we'll find out. Lee, unfortunately, you're not on the Best Coast, but for those who don't know and don't recognize the hair color, who are you?
Hey, my name's Lee Honeywell. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Tall Poppy. We do personal and executive cybersecurity for companies with high-profile employees and stakeholders. As Ian alluded to, I'm currently based in Ottawa, Canada. I spent a number of years on the West Coast, in Seattle at first when I went to work at Microsoft. And then I moved down to the San Francisco Bay Area and worked at Heroku, which was by that point part of Salesforce, and was also part of Slack. I was the third security employee at Slack, and really got to be on that hockey stick curve of startup life. And then in 2018, I started my own company, Tall Poppy, while I was still in the States. During the pandemic, I moved back to Canada. And we work with a lot of NGOs, tech platforms, and other organizations who have employees who are in the spotlight and have to deal with the unfortunate negative consequences, things like hacking of personal accounts, online harassment, that kind of thing. So yeah, definitely seen lots of incidents over the years, and there's, from a certain perspective, every incident is a failure. So really looking forward to the conversation today.
So I'm really excited. I think everybody has a very different lens on the cybersecurity space. Personally, so for those who don't know, my name is Ian L. Patterson. I'm CEO of Plurilock. We're publicly traded. We're proudly Canadian, although 90% of what we do is in the United States. So we're a build in Canada and export it internationally type of organization. Last year we did about 64 million in revenue. That's up from about $500,000 2 years before that. So we've seen tremendous growth, but unfortunately, whenever a cybersecurity sees growth, it's usually because bad stuff is happening in the world. And so, kind of to Lee's point, every incident is potentially a learning opportunity. I'll maybe start it off. I'm not as active on the technical side anymore, although earlier in my career I certainly was. I can remember when I was quite junior, I was brought in as the technical enterprise sales guy because I was technical enough to understand what was going on, but personable enough that they weren't too afraid of throwing me in front of a customer. But what that meant was I probably had a little bit more access to production systems than I ought to have. There was an absence of guardrails, I will just say. And so at the time I was trying to support some larger enterprise sales, kind of in the 6 to 7 figure range. And doing so meant pulling some data requests. And so the company that I was working in at the time, it was venture backed. It was an analytics company. We were doing big data analysis before Hadoop was on the scene, like back when it was hard and you had to roll everything yourselves, and Postgres kept falling over because it wasn't really set up to do the scale that you were trying to do. And so as the pre-sales guy, I was trying to answer some questions for some of the customers around size and scope and scale of data that we had access to and some of the analytics that we were trying to perform. So what did I do? Well, I wrote some SQL queries. And what I didn't fully appreciate is that writing those SQL queries on production systems, while there was also 2 other major jobs happening at the same time on those production systems, was a query too many. And so for the SaaS application that was serving 20,000 paying customers, I took it down. Full stop, took it down. Now, in my defense, what I will say is that those SQL queries on their own would have been fine. It was just that they were running with 2 other large jobs that were running in parallel. And so that was, as I say, that was one too many. So it was not awesome. I think I was also still in my probationary period at that time, so it was doubly not awesome. And like being the new guy, number one, also not really being part of the development team, number two, and the fact that it had such an obvious public-facing impact, like everything went down, not awesome. But what I will say, I didn't do it again. So definitely learned from that experience. The business actually put some guardrails in place around talking through how do jobs get run, and so there was a learning opportunity. But back in that day, it was it felt like it was the worst thing in the world to take down the whole production. Evgeny, you're on mute, but I'd love for you to chime in.
How did you know it went down? Like,
because the application stopped working.
So for you, or somebody called you, because it's always fun that we do something and then we realize something is wrong, but we don't know yet what's wrong. And then we see error message, we don't get access to the device, or somebody calling and screaming. So
my SSH terminal, or my SSH session, froze. So that was my first clue. So I set it to run. So I wrote a bash script, because I'm pretty sure like I looped it and I iterated, and like while this data file is still empty, just continue running. So the SSH session froze. After a couple of minutes, the sweat on my brow started to accumulate. I started smashing Control-C, Control-C, Control-C. Nothing was responding. And I'm like, this is not good. And then a cry arose from a different part of the bullpen saying, can anybody else load the app? And then the support team phone started to ring. And then I really started panicking. And it wasn't immediately apparent why the outage was happening, because I was hitting a database. I was basically hitting the database servers, and then suddenly the web app was down. So I didn't actually put it together that maybe those two things were related until the panic started to ensue. And then we had to, stand up the conference bridge, everybody pile on, let's start running queries, who can ping what. Yeah, it wasn't good. Evgeny.
Me. Okay, so I guess I know what the lesson you learned, not to do stuff in production and maybe ask stuff before. Okay, I'm gonna share an interesting story. It's gonna be a bit technical and not technical as well. So I'm gonna be two. It was a long time ago. I was working for a small company provider. If you're watching, you can recognize the brand here. If no, then you'll miss. But basically, iPhone just came in to Canada, like literally iPhone 1. And we needed to upgrade the firewalls that will pass the traffic for the iPhones. And there were several set of firewalls that basically will work on a different type of traffic. And if people work in firewalls, you need to do high availability, and majority of the companies have high availability in firewalls. It's been basically an active and passive firewall and a device. In this particular case, I'm going to go a bit technical right now. The settings was on Nokia firewalls. We needed to choose a VRRP. It's a protocol to do high availability in firewalls. What I didn't think during this time, that I learned later on, is that if you choose the same ID for the VRRP that already exists on the network, the other firewalls may think they're part of this firewall group, and it's going to be a bit of a mess. So I randomly choose 100. I remember it was 100. We did what we need to do to upgrade the firewalls. We brought them up, and everything was working fine, but we saw some kind of inconsistency in the work. Basically, some packets working, some packets are not working. And then I get a call, like, guys, the police is down. I was like, what? It's like, yeah, people cannot really call the police. It's like, how? Where? Not even touching anything related to police. So we kind of scratching our head. It's like, okay, where is the firewalls that are related to the police cellular traffic? Like, okay, they're always here, but we're working over there, but they're on the same network. And then we're thinking, okay, what else can be impacting them? Let's go check their settings. And what we see, the police firewalls have the same VRRP ID as we are, the 100. So basically, all the firewalls trying to connect to each other, and this was an inconsistency. This was a bit of a shock. It was during the night, but it was scary. So we brought down our firewalls. Lesson learned from there is that you not just put an ID, you also put a password for verification to connect. From this day on, I never had an ID for VRRP without password. This way I make sure there's some kind of other identification part that can do this. But it was definitely scary, and it was definitely quite a wide area of what you can bring down in Ontario. And it's very interesting because I think this was a very good indication for me how people learn and how fast they learn. And I had failures before, but this one kind of put me on the different guardrails. People say when you get scared, you can lift a car, or somebody was trying to do something with your baby, you jump 2 meters in height or on a fence. It was very, very hyper thinking about, okay, what's happening? And we had like multiple things in our head happening to understand the problem. And I realized during this time that if you learning and you want to learn something fast, basically you're going to be doing this in case you need to fix something. Not just because you want to build something, it's a different motivation, but when you need to fix something and you're under fire, then you're going to be learning this very fast. Now, not for everyone. Some people may not going to work under fire really well, just different people, different ideas. But for me, it was a very good indication when stuff are not working, I will learn this fast, I'll find a solution, and I'm going to remember this for a very, very long time. So this is for me.
That's a good one.
Of the
stories. Oh, yes.
You always remember.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll just tag on that one. working for a big casino, and they had gotten the Checkpoint chassis boxes, and they never let anybody touch those. Checkpoint always came in and set them up, but they needed somebody to install an interface. So I built the whole thing in VM, and I said, oh, just to add the interface, you just do this. And, add the IP, turn it on, and, got all the approvals to do it. I went and turned it on, and all of a sudden the boxes are running for about 15 seconds, then the other box, then the other box, then the other box. Because of the VRRP protocol, the new interfaces I had weren't turned on. So VRRP starts up and it says, oh, that interface is down, I better fail over to the other guy. The other guy starts up, nope, that interface is down, I better fail over to the other guy. So I ran and found the network guy and said, turn on those ports, and it stopped failing. Oh.
I think in carpentry, one of the first things you're taught is measure twice, cut once.
Seven times. I think it's called 7 times. But,
Well-
but then the problem, if it's 10 centimeters and you measure 7 times, it becomes 70 centimeters. So you need to indicate that you measure the same parts.
Well,
I
and
actually
then there's
did a
another
small
saying,
woodworking project recently, and I did in fact screw up one of the measurements, and I was thankfully able to use a piece of scrap wood, and it was just a kind of throwaway project, but it was very much oh yeah, I got to think this one through fully. That the adage is actually very true.
well, the adage that so the joke adage is measure once, cut twice, and it's still too short. I don't know what's going on there. Lee, over to you. What are some of or a fail that you've had to endure?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, it's been fun prepping for this and hearing Sean and Eugeni's stories that are very sort of hardware, that low level infrastructure stuff. When I was thinking about the sort of things that, in my career, similar examples, two big ones come to mind. One was a very specific one, and one was sort of a meta one. I used to work at Heroku, which is part of Salesforce, sort of a platform as a service hosting company. And we had some minor, there was a, package vulnerability in some part of the platform. And folks had to do a specific thing to make sure that their server images were updated. And so we sent out an email to I want to say it was a couple thousand people who had this particular package installed on their Heroku instance. And we included very helpfully a script that would do the fix for you. So you didn't have to figure it out on your own. But this was my first time sending out one of these emails when I this is maybe 2 or 3 months after I joined the company. And it's the most beginner error. There were magic quotes in the script, when we had copied it from whatever text file we'd written it in to the email, the fancy email templating tool that sent out these notifications. It had changed the quotes from regular quotes to smart quotes, and thus broken the script. Compounding the error, we had put the wrong reply to email on this notification. It should have just been no reply, but instead, when you replied to this erroneous notification, it opened a support ticket. And it turned out that opened a lot of support tickets, and the team just had a really bad week. But the upside of that was it was a very low stakes dry run right before Heartbleed happened. So we got to iron out all of the messy sort of process parts of this kind of mass security notification mere weeks before the biggest security notification incident of the first half of the decade. So in many ways, I'm actually really grateful for this failure, because it let us build a really solid pre-flight checklist. And whether it's sending out a security notification or reboot, upgrading a router, having that ability to test things offline, make sure things are going to work, or test things in a low stakes way. I was really, really grateful for that.
I think that the framing of that event as a training scenario, I think, is perfect. That is what these things are. I mean, hopefully these events are, you lost maybe a little bit of face, maybe a little bit of downtime, maybe a little bit of money, but not huge. It's not existential, and so you can learn, you can adapt, you can put policies, training in place. As you were telling your story, I was actually remembering the I think it was a national text message alert in Hawaii that went out announcing, was it a nuclear missile?
Yeah,
for a
missiles
minute,
sighted over Hawaii kind
yeah,
of thing.
and for a minute
everybody,
there, it looked like the
went
world was going to end.
apeshit.
And that was,
Excuse
I mean,
my
talk
French.
about notifications going bad. Like that's bad. That's not good.
Yeah, there's been interesting
But now we know it's
conversations
working,
recently with the well, exactly, we know it's working. We had a whole bunch of tornado warnings a couple weeks ago in Ottawa, and people are like, oh my gosh, there were never so many tornado warnings before. It turns out they've like upgraded the warning system, so there were just as many storms before, although we're also seeing like climate change stuff happening. But we can now alert people literally at like the couple of cell towers around where the predicted funnel is. So they are sending more of them, but they're much more focused. And the sort of security analogy there I'm thinking of is at a later job, I was at Slack. And we erred on the side of being like very transparent when we made like small mistakes, whether it was like, you know, a few people's cookies leaked into some logging system or whatever. We would send out these like 500 person like notification emails just out of an abundance of caution. They like almost certainly didn't even meet the bar for like California breach notification, whatever. But really just trying to be communicative with users about like what had happened. And I thought that was like a really sort of a good like cultural smell of like, let's err on the side of being transparent. Just sort of contrasting that with the email that I just got from Petro Canada, which I forwarded to Ian as soon as I got it. I was like, it doesn't even say the word breach. Like this is clearly breach fallout. It does not say the word breach. It does not say the word privacy. It was really not an impressive breach notification email. So,
Sean, you tantalized us with the word casino. What sort of stories can you share?
Oh, well, the interesting part about working at a casino is you think they're very secure and the money is secure, but everything else is not. You know, when there was a breach at this casino and went to their location, we found out that once you get on their network, you could get anywhere. So once you got on, you got anywhere. And what had happened is they got the hacker had got into a local casino in a small area, downloaded a bunch of data, and then jumped to their Vegas location and downloaded a bunch more data. And the way they proved it was they sent a video of here's all the data we collected. You know, they had, this was about 10 years ago. You know, it was 500 gig of data that they had downloaded over a period of time. Just crazy.
So what happened?
We shored up the security, started putting up breakers in between different areas, plus deployed technologies that were just sitting on the shelf. I mean, we showed up at a small location, replaced their Microsoft Defender, which back then was terrible, with a better product McAfee back then. IPS boxes that were sitting in a warehouse in Vegas showed up, and we deployed those as well. So it was a interesting change in the environment to see that. They weren't doing any logging collecting. They weren't doing. They were thinking about a lot of these things, but they didn't. And then we ended up going around to all the casinos around the world and seeing what issues they had, so we could help them narrow it down. Try and remediate these issues.
So it sounds like coming up with lessons learned and then sharing that with the rest of the communities. So it's similar to kind of what Lee's saying, like using those as training opportunities. I think so. In addition to just outright failures, I mean, my failure when I brought down production, that was entirely my own doing. There was no catalyst for that. It was just Ian shouldn't have been running. First of all, Ian shouldn't have scripted it, and like Ian definitely shouldn't have been running it while there were other jobs. What about upgrade failures or swapping devices? Does anybody have stories about upgrades going sideways?
Yep.
Yeah, I'll tell you about one. So going back to the firewalls, that Evgeny and I worked on for many a year. This was a multi-step upgrade. First off, the firewalls were running on Windows environments, which thank God they don't do that anymore. But it was Windows 2000, had to upgrade to Windows 2003. So, and the worst part is you couldn't just take the configuration on the Windows 2000 server because it was running an old version of the firewall. So you had to upgrade the firewall first, extract the configuration, and put it on the new 2003 server. So I did the upgrade on the Windows 2000 server, and it came back up and the firewall would not run. You couldn't start it. You couldn't uninstall it. You couldn't do basically anything with it. It was just annoying. Thankfully, I had done an extract before I started and was able to do the upgrade on a separate machine before I could install it on the new 2003 server, or else I would have been in a little bit of trouble trying to figure out how to rebuild a system from ground zero.
Yeah, upgrades are definitely interesting. And I was thinking, just because before telling the story about the upgrades, we maybe want to touch base later on about how do we avoid some of the problems and what do we do, because majority of the time you need to submit what you're going to do. You need to have change management. You need to explain to people what you're doing. You need to indicate the risk of the work you're going to be doing. And you also need to indicate how you're going to back off and basically restore everything. But long time ago, we just kind of wrote an email, wrote a couple of steps, and then did our work. So I show up at a customer's Friday morning, and this customer has 60 or 70 different locations with small devices that basically doing a VPN tunnel back to the office. And I did this work a variety of times, many times. You basically put a firmware, push it everywhere, you're doing the upgrade, it's rebooting the boxes, and you're up and running. We have a disruption of 5 minutes. It's during lunchtime. I tell the customer, dude, let's do it. He's like, yep, let's do it. It's all good. He's like, are you confident? Like, yeah, definitely I'm confident. I know what I'm doing. I'm an engineer, trust me. We push the button, we wait. And I see basically one tunnel coming back, and that's it. And during this time, somebody knock on the door. Is like, guys, what's up? Why the locations are down? It's like, oh, duh. It's like, what you guys did? You guys upgrade the locations. This was an approval. Why are you doing Friday afternoon? Now it's early afternoon. Why are you actually doing this? In any case, is there a ticket number? The whole 9 yards, basically all the reasons why we shouldn't be touching this, that I didn't have a good explanation why. So I'm kind of scrambling and trying to understand what happened, because I did it in the past. And I'm finding basically a knowledge-based article that was released a couple of days ago that this particular version of this particular small firewalls has an issue when you upgrade it. I'm like, oh my God. The good part, there was a relatively easy fix, but we end up basically connecting to all the 65, 70 locations, doing the fix and bringing tunnels up. So it took us like 2-3 hours to do the work, but it was a very, very good lesson learned about not just wing it, not just doing that, make sure you have all the preparation, all the approval, and you're not just doing it Friday during the day. Even so, in the past 10 to 15 years ago, it was okay. Right now, I don't think anybody will let you touch production. And also, like, the systems are different right now as well. Many systems move to the cloud, and you don't have big firewalls. Even so, data centers has them. Or with SaaS, as you indicated, you basically don't do the upgrades yourself. You let the SaaS provider do it for you, and you kind of behind the scenes, not really seeing what's happening. So this is an upgrade story that was very deep and close to my heart.
Well, in our case, we were the SaaS company. I mean, we were providing the SaaS service to customers, so there was nobody to push it to. Although, I mean, back in those days, it was a full colo. I mean, we didn't have AWS. This was in 2010, 2011. We did do a lift and shift to AWS, but at that time it was 3 colos spread across Canada, and there were definitely times when the 2 IT folks, it's like, well, where are they? It's like, well, they're at the colo, and they jump in their car and they drive downtown and they go do that. I mean, there was an apocryphal tale of actually a series of not full outages, but significantly reduced performance. And the root cause analysis ended up being a crimped Cat5 cable that was stretched from one rack across the hallway to the other rack. and the door had closed and crimped it, and so it wasn't a total failure, but it produced kind of weird results. So it's funny how much of this goes back to hardware.
You just mentioned about driving, so I'm wondering who has a story about longest drive or longest flight to fix something. Because
that's a good one.
I once was upgrading a system, click reboot, it didn't come back, and I drove 290 kilometers to just basically click enter and drive back.
Was there not? So you didn't have a set of remote hands, quote unquote. Like
no,
just
not in this case. Unfortunately, no. Again, this is one of the things it should work, but it didn't work as expected.
Well, but then there's also the anxiety of you're about to. So what I have found is doing firewall changes. You look at the rules that you're about to change on the firewall. You look at really closely,
out?
And you make sure, have I whitelisted SSH? Is port 22 still going to be up after I hit commit? And are they going to be updated in the right order? And then you don't want to execute it because you're not really sure. And to your point, you don't want to have to jump in the car and go drive, potentially take a ferry, drive, maybe a plane to get there to bring it back up if you get it wrong.
Or do you have a friend you can send who's local that you can task with? Sorry, go ahead.
No.
I was just gonna say, when we obviously there's this big migration of the cybersecurity community off of Twitter sometime around November last year, and my husband and I have been running a Mastodon instance, which is like a federated sort of community run Twitter clone. And it's certainly my first time back using actual bare metal hardware in a number of years, because we've just got a little colo box running our 300 person server with a bunch of friends. And it's amazing to go back into being close to the metal when it's been a decade of using stuff like Heroku, where it's abstracted so many different layers away, and just really appreciating each of those layers of indirection and abstraction is a piece of is an opportunity that you don't need to drive to the data center. Somebody else has to do the driving to the data center. So I think that's a pretty underrated effect of the shift to the cloud that I feel like we don't talk about enough.
That's a good point. There's a comment here on LinkedIn, so I'm just going to read out a little bit, and then this is a good jumping off point for some other stories. So Shiv says change management is impossible with some vendor software, which true. So they had to upgrade EDR on the company's fleet. The upgrade ended up resetting notification settings of every machine, which turns out it was an undocumented behavior. And so it freaked out the employees and flooded the IT service with tickets as a result of that. I have a similar story. So also in the colo, so the company had raised a Series A, and they had the use of proceeds for the Series A was to invest in a whole bunch of hardware. And so they upgraded the colo. And so they, instead of buying used servers off of eBay, they actually got some real, some big iron. And one of them was a huge disk array. It was a SAN, a real enterprise SAN, and it had real-time failover. And so the advertised feature was, this whole box can go down, and seamlessly in real time with no degradation of service, the other box can just magically swoop in and take over. And so at one point, the team lead had some folks from out of town, and so he took him down to the colo, and he decided, we've got this all set up, let's demonstrate it. And so he turned off the one machine, and the other one failed over just fine. The trouble was, he didn't tell anybody he was going to do this. So back in head office, everybody's freaking out. We just lost half the SAN array, guys. What's going on here? What's going on? So it was definitely a panic-inducing moment that, again, we heard shouting from the opposing side of the open office environment. So any near misses, any alarms that went off that actually turned out to be false alarms?
It's a good one, definitely. Near misses, probably a lot. Just need to think about them. I remember a couple of times when you reboot a device and you realize you reboot the wrong device, and you're like, oh no, you actually reboot the right device. Because sometimes like with firewalls, definitely like firewall 1, blah, 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 AB. Did I reboot the correct device? So you're like panicking. Okay, yes, it's a correct device, Thanks God. Because I remember in the past, you're like, okay, I need to reboot the device. And then you reboot the device and 2 minutes passed. And then somebody, hey, what's up with the internet? I'm like, oh, did I reboot the wrong device?
You're in a maze of SSH terminals and they all look alike. It's
Twisted
dark and you're about to
passages.
be eaten by a group.
So
I'm
this is
remembering. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
no, yeah, I'll do it after.
Remembering vividly MS-12 020, which was one of the first Patch Tuesday patches after I joined the Patch Tuesday team at Microsoft. And it was a terminal services DOS. And the worry with a DOS vulnerability in something publicly exposed like terminal services is always, is somebody going to figure out a way to escalate this DOS to RCE? And for the like many weeks after the Patch Tuesday release, people were like frantic. We within Microsoft were like kind of freaking out. Like this is a wormable bug, right? Like it's a very serious bug. If you can make an RCE out of it. So we're sort of like paying attention to the early days of Twitter. There's like news, and then there's back in the day, people hung out on IRC. And I remember hanging out in the Metasploit IRC channel for the weeks after that Patch Tuesday. And at some point, somebody was like, man, I feel bad for the poor Microsoft intern that has to watch us like trying to figure out how to exploit this this DOS. And I'm just like, people knew who I was and knew my handle. So if anybody had actually like looked at the channel list, somebody might have been like, oh, Haley. But it was just, and it didn't turn out to be wormable, which is nice. It didn't turn out to be RCE. It was just a DOS, but it was definitely like a couple of weeks of like, is somebody going to figure it out? So that was a nice like false. It wasn't a false alarm. Like it was a true alarm, but it was the sensitivity of it was true rather than underrated. So that was a fun one.
I have a question for the group, and this is sort of to wrap up. Based on all of these fails, so upgrades going sideways, taking down production, or false alarms, like things that actually appeared very bad and didn't. Did any of you suffer professional repercussions?
Yes and no. There was a lot of screaming in a way. There was a lot of we don't want you here anymore, for example. I actually had one customer that told me they don't want to see me. It was then a year after they kind of backed down and I came back. I had a interesting story with one of my employees that I think was related. And I think it's actually interesting story because it indicated something in our industry. He basically went to do work for a customer. Somehow he had something on his laptop that infected the customer. It wasn't very big, but it was a big story about it in the company. Mm-hmm. And later on, one of the kind of thing that happened after is like we cannot longer connect laptops to our customers. So this employee was very panicking that he basically gonna lose his job. And I told him during this time, like, dude, you made a mistake. We understand, but you're not gonna lose your job. He's like, but I made such a big problem. He's like, but you're a professional person. You're subject matter expert. You're not gonna lose your job because of the mistake, because what you provide and doing for the company is much more valuable. If you don't have the knowledge, if you're not educated person that basically not helping company make money in a way, that yes, you may lose your job. But in this case, I felt very certain that everything's going to be okay. Yes, there was a problem. Yes, we spoke about this. Let's hope it's not going to happen again. And we're going to put some explanation guard layers. But if you're a professional person and you have one mistake and 50 successes, then I think you're going to be safe. And personally, if the company let you go because you made one mistake, then it's probably good because you don't want to work for this company.
John?
I think it's been interesting because a lot of times I'm the guy they send in to fix my own problem. So this is more of a personal issue. A customer sent me a message, says, hey, you got to fix this. And I was kind of complaining about it. I think that email, Evgeny was on this email. Instead of hitting reply, hit reply all, complaining about the customer. The customer got the email. It was not a fun couple of days, but the thing is, part of it is you just got to stand up. I remember going into a meeting and the manager sitting there and he goes, well, we had this guy do something, reply all he shouldn't have. And I said, stop. It was me. Here's what I did. You just stand up, and they sent me back to the client because I was the guy who had to fix it anyway. And, I just stood there and took my medicine and said, I'm sorry. I was a little upset. And, because we were integrating technologies into their environment and they had responsibilities to fix stuff on their side. And I had to go figure out how to fix the stuff on their side to get my technology to work. So, you get frustrated, you make mistakes, and you just accept your mistakes, accept the lumps, and move on.
How about you, Lee?
Yeah, the thing that comes to mind is I think burnout is one of the things that when you have the same kinds of incidents over and over again, and you're not able to resolve the root cause. Certainly one of the teams I was on, that was something we really, really struggled with. We could not get the kinds of technical fixes that we needed to both slow the flood of incidents and also, or at least of notifications that we would then have to investigate thoroughly and in some cases respond, but we were just seeing so many false positives. And when you're day in, day out, just dealing with that sort of crap flood, not being able to ever improve the system, it really, really wears you down. And I think it's one of the ways that, especially more in the sort of SOC kind of environment where it's a more transactional kind of security work, if you don't have that ability to improve things over time, it really wears you down.
Well, from my side, there are stories that circulate about, oh, this person did X and it was a fireable offense. I haven't actually seen. I can't think of any situation where that's happened in practice. You worry about it. You think that might happen. But in a lot of cases, the problems that I have seen or the errors that were made were also errors on behalf of the organization. I think Evgeny, you were mentioning having change management in place. Well, the times where I've seen things go down were largely ones where change management wasn't in place to begin with. There was a lack of process from the business, and so if a human experienced or caused downtime, to a certain extent, it was actually the business's fault for not having the right processes in place to protect the human. Evgeny?
So I want to add something here, because when we say change management, I think you can go to extreme. When you have so much change management, you cannot do anything. So where do we start? And I think personally, what I learned for myself, you start with yourself. You have your own change management. Forget about everybody else. You need to create your own process and what you're going to do. It's basically, okay, I'm doing whatever I'm doing. I need to document for myself. I need to document what I need to do, with the assumption that it's a very long process, and maybe evening or night, you will be tired and you will forget stuff. So to have a checkbox, I used to use OneNote back in the day, where I can basically check what I did, and maybe it's not going to be sequence, because maybe some stuff will jump, but I know if I did something, I'm going to do this. And also what I learned for myself, very important, if you're making an ad hoc changes to fix or troubleshoot something, you have to write them down. And if you work with a partner, you actually put them aloud. Hey, I made this change. Let's write it down. Because later on, when you finish troubleshooting, this is the problems we will have, because we open SSH to troubleshoot something and we never closed it because we worked for 24 hours and we forgot about it. Or some cases, 36 hours as well. So this is personal change management, where you document what you do, what is the state, and how you come back. I think it's the most important part. Later on, of course, company change management, not to get it too extreme, to actually do the work, is also helping.
Well, that goes back to, if you don't plan, you plan to fail. I tried to impress upon the engineers that work for me, at least sit down and think about the steps that you're going to do to execute, to do whatever work you're going to do. Because as people know, once you get into the battle, the plan goes out the window. But at least you had a plan when you started, and it helps you focus on what you need to get done. And it helps you get around any issues you run into because you've at least thought about it. And it makes it a lot easier to stay focused in that respect.
So just as we're coming to the close and starting to wrap up, maybe we could go around. If people want to follow you and find out more about what you're working on, maybe we could each just go and give a quick plug. So Evgeny, you're going to be the longest list because you've got like a bajillion things on the go. So maybe you can start. Where can people find you, and what resources are you publishing right now?
I think the easiest part is just find me on LinkedIn. Thanks, guys. There's not too many Evgenys. I think I'm like the only one in Canada that spelled his name like this. So it's Evgeny, Evgeny, last name Kharam. And you will find majority of the links and the stuff I'm doing there. This is Security Architecture Podcast, Cyber Inspiration, and some other work I'm doing as well. But probably the easiest thing is LinkedIn.
Sean?
Same here. The best place to find me is on LinkedIn, Sean C. Higgins. And that's the easiest way to find me. And a lot of things that I'm doing will show up on that feed.
Lee?
LinkedIn as well. Just my name on there, Lee spelled Leigh, Honeywell, just like it sounds. And I also have a personal website at leehoneywell.com that has links to all my other socials and projects, my company, all that stuff. Yeah.
And it sounds like Mastodon from what we heard.
Indeed, there you can find ottawa.place, which is our Mastodon server, as well as we've got obviously an account for the company over on infosec.exchange, and we're part of the conversations there as well.
Amazing. Well, so my name is Ian L. Patterson. I am available on LinkedIn. Would also like to give another shout out to the Canadian Cybersecurity Network, CCN. So if you are not if you have found this through my or Evgeny's or Sean's or Lee's individual profiles, the thing to do is to then navigate to the Canadian Cybersecurity Network LinkedIn group and join there. Content, discussion, resources, events, all of that is there. It is one of the fastest growing LinkedIn groups that I've actually witnessed. And so there's a lot of attention. So we recommend people sign in there. And I think that I'd love to do this again sometime. So I'd like to thank everybody. Evgeny, thank you. Sean, thank you. Lee, thank you. This was a treat. It's always good to talk to you folks, but it's fun to swap war stories after the wounds have healed. I think if it's too fresh, it's still a little bit painful, but after the wounds have healed, I think it's fun to share lessons learned.
10 years, lots of therapy. It's all in the past. It's great chatting with you guys. Yeah, definitely a few beverages.
I want to add something small, that there's another webinar, Critical Start, August 15, that I think already been posted on the link. It's going to happen August 15 at 2 p.m. Eastern. We will talk about a malware, I believe so. We'll get details later on.
Sounds great. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you. Back to the backstage.